Good morning. Good morning. How are you today? This is your host, Dr. Maul. I've been away from this desk for some time now, um, taking a break and trying to deal with some other agency issues. But it's good to see you. It's good to hear from you. And it's a privilege. I look forward to coming back on a regular basis. We'll be doing quite a few more of these sessions over the next several months as we approach the end of 2017. Man, it's amazing how the year has flown, right? Anyway, we want to thank God we're still here. We are still here, and it's a good thing to be here. We've been studying the life of David, and it seems like it's forever, but we're still studying the second part, David's life. And if I remember correctly, we were up to the point where war was starting between David and his son Absalom. For those of you who may be new to this broadcast, my name is the Reverend Dr. Desmond Maul. I'm the founder of Hosanna Ministries, president and CEO of Family360. And thank God for the privilege of being able to use this medium to bring you these teachings. My teachings are somewhat a little different. I don't holler and scream. I aim to equip, educate, inform you regarding the Word of God. And, my teachings integrate the Word of God along with our behavior science, psychology, sociology, and whatever else I can use to highlight and bring forth the need for changes in our lives and bolstering our faith. My office is in Conyers, Georgia, 2012 Eastview Parkway in Conyers, Georgia. We are in Suite 400. Our local number is 770-940-7196. That's 770-940-7196. And we are on Facebook. You can listen to us on Facebook. You can listen to us on YouTube as well as on Zeno Live. To follow up these broadcasts and to download them and use them for your own purposes. So that's Facebook, YouTube, Zeno Live, and locally in the Atlanta area on WATP 1420 out of Decatur, Georgia. That's out of Decatur, Georgia. So God bless you. We've been looking at the life of David, and we see where David was down, but he was not out. David had a major problem on his hand. His son was about to kill him. And everything that smelled of David, that looked like David, talked like David, walked like David, his son Absalom was showing no mercy, no pity, no love for his father. He wanted to become king. Do you have people in your family, in your circle, who are so ambitious they will kill and destroy any and everything in their path to realize their goal? We are living in that age today, whether it's politics or religion or in the secular world of the workplace. We have individuals who will kill, rob, and steal. Some will kill for nothing, just for the pleasure of it, because of their ambition, because nothing is going to stop them. It is what we have here with Absalom. David was fleeing from Absalom. David had his army. David could have stood up and fight against Absalom, but David chose to flee. David had his military personnel apparatus all around him. But instead of fighting the upstart, who at that time did not really have a good, strong army, David decided not to take on his son. I guarantee you, if it was some other enemy from outside or within the nation of Israel, David would have annihilated them just like that. But David had a special place in his heart for his son Absalom, and it is this place that caused this boy to feel as if he could rise up and kill his father. Some of us have spoiled our children. From youth, we have spoiled them. We have allowed them to get away with the proverbial saying, murder. They've gotten away with everything. No one has disciplined them, and therefore they feel as if they can do anything, say anything. Daddy allowed it, mommy allowed it, and it's been a major problem. So David was out. He was having major problem, and he was a pitiful sight as he fled from his palace, uh, walking up the Mount of Olives, weeping, crying. Remember now, he's barefoot. He's fleeing in a hurry. He has no shoes on his feet, and we see where as he fled, Ziba, you know, met him, and Ziba somehow gave David some story about Mephibosheth, whom David had taken into his home. And at that moment, in the heat of his anger, David gave to Ziba all that belonged to Mephibosheth. And from there, David went across another fellow who was an undercover hater. He's from the family of Saul, Shimei, and Shimei, a close relative of King Saul. Boy, he let David had it. He threw stones at David. He cursed at David. He brought down fire and brimstone from heaven upon David. You see this in 2 Samuel 16, verses 7 to 8. And it seems as if, David would have taken matters in his own hand and gotten rid of Shimei, since Shimei legally has a claim to the throne, but David left that alone. So there was still some bitterness between the followers of Saul and David. They resented David for ascending to the throne. They blamed David for Saul's death. And listen, there are people all around us. Sometimes they blame you for everything. You may have had nothing to do with that person's circumstance, but somebody is going to point the finger at you. So listen, David took Shimei's abuse in stride, commanded Joab was not that kind, and Joab and another fellow, David's nephew named Abishai, they were angry, they were livid, and they wanted to go and run a sword through Shimei, but David said no. 2 Samuel 16, 9 to 14, David said no. So as David and his company continued to flee, again, Shimei continued to pelt David with stones and insults. This time, Absalom was marching into David's kingdom, to take matters into his own hands. And we come to a place now where there's a plan in place, and David was able to get away, and it now comes to a time where they had to fight. David divided his army in three. Joab, his chief commander, was going to lead one group. Abishai was going to lead another group, and the third group was under Ittai, the Gittite, who was new to David's military camp. You'll see this in 2 Samuel 15, 19 to 22. David's troop encouraged him to stay behind. They did not want David, the light, the king, to go out on the battlefield. So David listened, and they went out on the battlefield. The problem is David began to discourage his men by telling them to spare the life of Absalom. Now you're at war, even though it's your son. And I know some of you will say, well, I can't fault David. But this is life and death. This is not just for you, but it's for the soul of the nation. You have men who are putting their lives on the line. So don't discourage those who are on your side. So David still loved his son Absalom, and he begged his army not to harm him, not to kill him. What are they supposed to do with him? In those days, they didn't have POWs, prisoners of wars, especially when it comes to your enemy. You chop off the head of your enemy. So David here gave a command, basically, to his military rulers not to harm Absalom. Now, Absalom, as the battle went ahead, Absalom was riding on his mule, and this boy, he was so handsome, so tall, so good looking. His hair, he had a, let me call it, a very tall, natural afro on top of his head. I don't know what else to say. And his hair got caught in the branches of an oak tree. He could not get himself out, and his donkey kept walking. His donkey or mule kept walking out from under him, and he basically stood there thrashing about pitifully when Job was hunting for him. Job had one objective in mind. Job had one purpose in mind. Joab was going to end this war as quickly as he could, and he went after the commander Absalom of the other side. So Joab, came upon. Well, he was told by one of the soldiers that they saw Absalom, so he was well known, dangling in a tree. And Joab was somewhat frustrated with the young man who did not kill Absalom. That young man used his sense. This is the king's son. I was there when he gave the command to spare his life. So we see here Joab, he's now going to risk his relationship with David to end this war. Keep in mind that it was not just David who was hurt, but Absalom had put his reputation, his life at risk to bring, Joab had put his reputation, his life at risk to bring Absalom back out of exile. And listen to me, Absalom was hurt by the treachery of Joab. Joab was the one who stuck his neck out to meet with Absalom. Joab was the one who understood David's love for his son. And we see here that this young man, the other soldier, refused to lift a hand to kill Absalom when he saw him hanging, dangling, in the tree. But Joab, no. There was not enough money in the world to stop Joab from doing this thing. And despite the fact he heard David's plea, 2 Samuel 18:14-15, Joab basically dismissed David's command, David's plea, and Joab ruthlessly killed Absalom. He wanted this war to be over with. He wanted this thing to be done. And Joab made sure that Absalom was dead, really, really dead, because this boy was going to continue to be a thorn in the side of his father. He was going to continue to be a thorn in the side of Israel. So here we see, want to get rid of this nemesis, this parasite, this whatever you want to call Absalom. But this was an unnecessary war. But because of Absalom's ambition, the nation was at war. Joab killed Absalom, and so the rebellion was over. Well, so we thought. The rebellion was over. And Joab was in total command, and he stopped the fighting. He blew the trumpet the moment Absalom was killed. Absalom's body was disposed of, and a message was sent to David by a Cushite, a black guy, an Ethiopian. Blacks are all over in the Bible. Uh, and we see Joab sent the Cushite who could run. Athleticism is not new to black people. Even back in those days, blacks could run. Here it is. Joab is sending for this Cushite to tell David the news. And there was another fellow there named Ahimaaz who also asked to run. He wasn't given a message. You got some people like that. They kind of impose themselves in situations. He had no message to run with, but he wanted to run. Joab got tired of him. Joab said, Ahimaaz, go ahead and run. And he outran the black guy. He outran the Cushite, and he got there, and David said to him, what's happening? Paraphrasing. All this guy Ahimaaz could say was, all is well. David asked him clearly, is it well with the young man Absalom? 2 Samuel 18 verse 29. David asked him clearly. And all Ahimaaz could say was, all is well. He had no news. He was not given the news. He probably knew what was done, but it was not his job to relay the news. Then the Cushite arrived, and David asked him, is it well with the young man Absalom? And David was given the news that Absalom was dead. And guess what? Have you ever seen a grown man cry about the death of his son? David lost it. Emotionally, David lost it. His command for gentle treatment of his son Absalom was ignored. And Absalom and David could not take it. His hopes of seeing his son alive were gone. See, David's not thinking straight here during this time of tragedy. And many times when we're going through grief, when we're under significant stress, we should not be making major decisions because we are not thinking straight. Our emotions may be upside down. And so David, wept in the same way that parents today weep when they lose a child, despite the badness of Absalom, despite the heartaches, and many parents can identify with David, despite the evil that Absalom had tried to bring upon David and the nation, because I'm sure during this war, many young men had lost their lives in a foolish war. It was a foolish war. Despite all of that, David still loved this bad boy, his bad boy son, Absalom. Absalom was the one who killed for his half-brother on the behalf of his sister Tamar, who this half-brother Amnon had raped. Amnon is the young man who set up his half-brother's execution when at a party. Absalom is the one who fled into exile for 3 years. This same Absalom begged after spending 3 years in exile. He came back home, but he had to wait another 2 years before he could see his father. This Absalom, who forced his father out of his own city, out of his own home, away from some of his concubines, his wives. This Absalom, who slept in the open on the roof with his father's concubines, wives, had this young man who had no regard for decency and honor and order. This is the same boy now that David is crying over. He's bawling, shedding all kind of tears because Absalom could do no wrong. What kind of parent are you? Can your child do wrong? Can your child, everybody sees that you have a bad boy, a bad daughter, but in your eyes, it's not so. What it is you're hiding from, what it is that you're denying, because sooner or later, the law is going to catch up with that child of yours. You may not discipline your child, but the law will. Society will. Your son or your daughter may create harm, maybe significant harm to others. But sooner or later, society is going to exact its revenge. I challenge you as a mother and a father, do your best, discipline your child in the home before those outside of your home have to step up and discipline that boy or girl. David, who had been so eloquent when lamenting and mourning Saul and Jonathan and Abner, was reduced basically to a cry of pain. 2 Samuel 18:33 says, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." David was willing to sacrifice everything for his son, so his son, this poor son of his, could live. Read that story again about David pining over Absalom, his own men, and later on, this grieving David, Job is going to confront him. This Absalom who had torn David's family apart. This David who had barely escaped the clutches of his son who wanted to be king. David is mourning all that was dead, all that was lost, all that was gone. And he failed to consider the men in his military who had put their lives on the line. Some may have sacrificed their lives for David. But Joab was having none of that. Joab was getting fed up with David's pity party over his son that wanted to kill them all. Joab understood that there was work to be done. And Joab became very impatient with David. Much so. Joab did not want to hear any more of David's whimpering. Do you have a friend who can confront you? Huh? Because I tell you, right here, Joab was that friend, that employee, that companion, that commander-in-chief who could confront the king and tell him to stop his whimpering, to stop his crying. So Joab soundly chastised David for neglecting the men who sacrificed their lives for him, for neglecting his duties as the king. Here it is, David continued to whimper and to cry over a headstrong, murderous, rebellious, and ruthless son. Joab is saying, enough already. Enough, he's dead. I killed him, he's dead. David forgot he was still the king. He was still the ruler. David was grieving. David's grieving was an insult to his men, some of whom had died in this battle, and many, many others had risked their lives for David's life and the territory. Read that in 2 Samuel 19, verses 6 to 7. Joab had had enough. Joab stated the case forcibly. He was very forceful with David. He was very honest with David. He gave David a dose of tough love. Every now and then, we need a dose of tough love. Every now and then, we need to have somebody honestly, forcefully speak the truth to us. It's time for David to get back to business. He's the king. He had to shake off his grief and handle his business. Long live the king. You can't keep mourning over what is dead and gone. Some of us have kept shrines in our homes for family members who have passed on. You respect them by mourning and continuing to live life. You don't spend years and years incapacitated, bowled over in grief and sadness. Death is a part of life. Sooner or later, if the Lord does not come before it's our turn, we got to go. We all age. At my age, sometimes I look back and say, man, where did the years go? Where have the years gone? And I look at me today and I say, man, I still got so much to do. And I'm still asking God for more years and excellent, good to excellent health and success. And every day I wake up, every day I pray, God, thank you for this day. Thank you for life, health, strength, all family members, children, grandchildren, and thank you for long life and good health and success in my endeavors today. Man, I love life. I love life, and I hope you do the same. I love life. You see, so there is much to be done. So Joab stated the case forcibly and honestly to David, and David came to his senses. David composed himself. He took a seat at the city gate. The scriptures tells us where the people came to him, and he waited upon them to execute judgment. And many of the Israelites who defected to Absalom were the first to reconcile and to recommit themselves to David. Many of these Israelites who had defected to Absalom were now the first to come to David. And guess what? David pleaded with them, especially those tribes that defected to Absalom. Family. And David made a big mistake. The Bible tells us in his grief and in his anger, maybe to spite Joab, he appointed Amasa, Absalom's commander-in-chief, over the army. Big mistake. As I said, when you're grieving and mourning, that's not the time to make such major decisions. Joab. David is fighting his best friend, the man who had been with him through thick and thin. David is saying to Joab, you ignore my order to spare my son, so you are no longer commander-in-chief. Amasa was the commander-in-chief of Absalom's army. He was the enemy. But in an effort to unite both sides, the northern and the southern kingdom, the tribes that had defected, those who were more loyal to Saul, David appointed Amasa as commander-in-chief. This was not a good move at all. Because later on, we'll see where it's going to lead to Amasa's untimely death. Sometimes we do some things that set others up to fail or for an untimely death. David, in his desperation to reunite the territory and to eliminate the resentments over the death of Absalom, his son, appointed Amasa as his commander-in-chief. Absalom was charismatic. He was charming, but he could not have galvanized. He could not have motivated these people. And listen, David is doing what he has always done. He's trying to appease. He's trying to bargain to have peace. And in so doing, he brought into his cabinet a top job. Amasa was his nephew. Amasa was David's nephew. And David conveniently forgot that Amasa had just lost the war that they just fought with Absalom. And immediately Amasa decided to appease the people, northern people, and bring them over to David's side. On his way back to Jerusalem, this is funny, because there are those who expect you to die in your time of desperation. There are some people who expect you to die. There are some people who thought you will never make it out of your situation. In the case of David, there were those who thought he would not make it back home. Listen, not everybody in your circle like you. Not everybody who's around you is for you. Some of them will smile in your face, pat you on your shoulders, give you a handshake, but watch out. Be careful of those who are close. You know, don't ignore the signs. But on his way back to Jerusalem, those that he saw on his way out when he was running for his life showed up. Shimei. Remember Shimei, the one who threw stones at David and cursed David, famously cursed David. Here he is now asking for forgiveness. What would you do? What would you have done? There are some. In today's day, we are quick to forgive. Quick to forgive. There are some people who don't need to be forgiven, if I can put it bluntly. In the same way that God has not forgiven certain individuals, certain people, God cut them off. Certain people, God gets rid of them. Because the plea for forgiveness for some is shallow. It doesn't mean much. They're just waiting for the next time to come at you again. There's some people who need to live with, experience the consequences of their actions. We are living in a very liberal society today when you have one man killing people left and right. When you have crime bosses out there, you just kill people without blinking an eye. We have criminals in our neighborhoods, in our communities. Some of them have been to prison for 1, 2 murder or more, 3 or 4, and guess what? They out on payroll, and many of them will kill again. We have rapists out here roaming our streets, and our criminal justice system gives them a slap on the hand, and they're back out being a terror in our communities. Some people need to be put away. Some people need capital punishment because that's the only thing that's going to stop them. The gospel is not going to stop them. Their liberality is not going to stop them. Giving them a good job is not going to stop them. Giving them family. No, the DNA of some people is just evil. There are some people who are born to evil. Until the day they die, they are downright evil. We cannot go around forgiving those people, because then we're going to pay the price in our homes, with our children, or in our communities, in our churches, in our places of employment. We have evil people around us, and they don't care who you are. You have something, they're going to come and get it. Sometimes you don't have to do anything to them. They just have that evil awakening that morning. They're going to hurt somebody. Doesn't matter your color, doesn't matter your gender. Give them a gun, and they're going to hurt people. So we see Shimei begging for forgiveness, the one who had stoned David. If he could have killed David, he would have. The one who had cursed David. Here he is. He's now saying, David, you're my ruler. Yeah, right. Abishai, one of David's commanders, still wanted to kill him. Oh, that's my boy. Abishai still wanted to kill Shimei, because Abishai saw through the falsehood of Shimei, but David prevented it. 2 Samuel 19:22, Mephibosheth, who had stayed back in Jerusalem hoping to reclaim the crown. Oh yes, hoping to remember now, he's Saul's grandson. He had stayed back. He did not leave with David when David was running for his life. He had stayed back in Jerusalem hoping to reclaim the crown for the house of Saul. He came to Jerusalem to meet David. And he gave David some cockamamie story that Ziba lied on him. David asked him why he had stayed behind. And he blamed his servant Ziba. David didn't completely believe Mephibosheth. So you know what David said to him? Split your possessions and property between you and your servant Ziba. Barzillai, the Gileadite, who had provided food for David when he was in Mahanaim, met David at the Jordan River. David offered him a place in Jerusalem. Barzillai was good. He supplied David and his men with food. And David returned the kindness on his way back towards Jerusalem. And now we come to a place where we continue to see the division, because there was still a tug of war between Israel and Judah over who had the greater claim on King David. 2 Samuel 19:41-43. There was still a division. Old wounds don't disappear quickly, because we will see that as soon as Solomon died, the split comes right back into existence, where the northern people and the southern tribes divided and split up again soon after the death of Solomon. When we look at the rebellion of Absalom, when we look at his defeat, when we look at his death, there was another fellow that came upon the scene pretty soon after to challenge David. His name was Sheba, from the tribe of Benjamin, the northern tribe. He refused to recognize David as the ruler, 2 Samuel 21:2. David now had trouble all over. And he's going to have to deal with this fellow named Sheba, as we will see. But when he got to Jerusalem, he set his house in order. He put away the concubines that his son Absalom had slept with, and they lived as widows because Absalom violated them. 2 Samuel 20, verse 3. So he's back in charge. David is back in charge. And guess what happens? He wasted no time in dealing with the situation with Sheba. He ordered his new commander-in-chief, Amasa, to bring the troops of Judah to Jerusalem in 3 days for a strategy session. And Amasa could not get the job done in the time frame, and this was a major error on the part of Amasa. We know that Joab would have gotten it done. We know that Joab would have had the troops there in 2 days. But remember, there was still resentment towards David. Oh, they showed that they were united with him when Amasa became commander-in-chief, but we see it was not genuine. David now realized he had made a mistake by appointing Amasa. Amasa was inept. He was not the military type of guy that Joab was. But David would not admit his mistake. And so, guess what happened? David ignored Amasa, and he laid out the situation to Abishai. 2 Samuel 20, verse 6. Amasa bungled the job, but here is Abishai and Joab. They always work good together. And Abishai met the troops. Where is it? At Gibeon, where he ran smack into Joab. Oh boy. He ran smack. Amasa ran smack into Joab. And Joab killed him with one thrust of the sword in his intestines. Joab, do you see the anger? Do you see the resentment? Joab was boiling. Joab was resentful because David had appointed David that he had brought to the throne, David that he had supported through thick and thin. David had turned against him, and Joab was not going to sit down and take it lightly. So he met Amasa and he killed him with no remorse, with no regrets. Joab killed Amasa, and he turned around and joined his brother Abishai, and they went to get Sheba. These brothers were something else. Abishai and Joab. The Bible tells us in 2 Samuel 20, verse 12 to 13, Amasa was blocking the road as he lay there in his blood. He was a stumbling block. And they moved him out the way so the action could continue. No one stopped and mourned for Amasa. No one cried. Neither Joab nor Abishai missed a step. They kept going after what? Sheba. They didn't miss a step at all. These two brothers were bloodthirsty. That's why David was able to use them to realize his dream to become king and to maintain his kingdom. They were warriors. They were brutal. They would destroy any city, any town, anyone to capture Sheba. Who is Sheba? It's the first time we're reading about him stepping up, wanted to challenge David. And guess what? When Joab and Abishai got there, it's called Abel of Beth Maacah. Ooh, that's where Sheba was hiding. Abel of Beth Maacah, something like that. A woman did not want her town get destroyed, and she made a deal. She made sure that she promised Joab and Abishai, some violent women in the scriptures, that Sheba's head would be thrown over the city wall if Joab spared the city. There's some violent women out here today, not just in scriptures. This is one of those nameless women. Nameless. But she was looking out for her city and her town. She didn't want war. She did not want her town and city to be destroyed. And she promised. And this woman saved the city. This woman saved the city, and Joab sounded the trumpet. The war was over. Sheba was dead. The troops returned home, and Joab went to Jerusalem. And Joab now reclaimed his office. He was what? Back as commander-in-chief. He rejoined David's cabinet. The territory was back intact. You'll see that in 2 Samuel 20, 23 to 26. And guess what? Nowhere in scripture did you see where David and Joab discussed Joab's demotion, nor his rehiring. Nowhere. Neither of them addressed it. Things moved along as if nothing had happened. Sometimes we are married to people like that. You may just have a nasty, ugly fight. And the next minute, everything is sanguine. Everything is... It seems like nothing happened. Wait a minute, you just did so. There are people like that. That's what we see here with Joab. They acted... Let's ignore the problem. We had a major fight between David and Joab. David tried to punish Joab for killing Absalom by giving the commander-in-chief position to Amasa. David did not discuss it with Joab. And Joab was not going without a fight. Abishai, Joab's brother, neither of them, two violent men, they did not agree with this move by David. And so they killed Amasa. David said nothing of it. Not at this time anyhow. I think sometime later on he's going to address it. Joab resumed his position as commander-in-chief. David didn't say anything, not in scripture. They never discussed Joab's demotion. They moved along as if nothing had happened. So we are hoping that after the Sheba rebellion that David and Joab put down, that David could enjoy the fruits of his labor and live to a ripe old age. However, that was not to be the case. You see, because the business of King Saul's ghost, was not over yet. King Saul's problems, his friends, his families were still resentful of King David. And even though there was a pretense that they had reconciled with David, it was not to be. That pretense was false. You see, some of us remember old wounds for a long time. Old wounds don't go away so easily. We may sweep them under the rug. We may put them on the roof, under the foundation. We may try and do all manner of things to avoid the old wounds from reappearing. But listen, those old wounds sometimes appear at the time we least expect it. And even though the nation was prospering under David, there was problems to come. And we are told that there was a 3-year famine, part of God's judgment upon Israel, because Saul had killed the Gibeonites, a group of non-Israelites who in 2 Samuel 21, 1-9 were promised asylum. They had tricked the Israelites into giving them asylum. But Saul, you can read that story. Saul did not go along with it, and Saul killed them. Old wounds do not disappear for most people. Because the Gibeonites were occupying the land when the Israelites arrived under the leadership of Joshua. And the Gibeonites devised a clever point to avoid extermination by Joshua. And Joshua spared them and made them slaves. Joshua 9 verses 1-27. Joshua spared their lives because they had tricked the Israelites. You see, and there was, because Saul had killed them, God had honored Joshua's word. And when Saul dishonored God's word, it looked bad. And so to punish Israel, God sent a famine of 3 years. I'm not sure if David knew what happened, but David went and he consulted with the Gibeonites and he asked them what happened. And they told David that Saul had tried to kill them off after Joshua had promised a place for them in Israel. They didn't want money. Oh yeah, we're going to have to pick up from here tomorrow. They didn't want money. They did not want money from David. And they did not want to kill for the sake of killing. But they asked of David one thing. And I touched on this some time ago in Rizpah. I had taught some lessons on Rizpah. They asked David for one thing: if they would give him, if he would give them 7 sons of Saul, that would make things right. They were going to kill them. They were going to sacrifice them. 7 sons of Saul, and David willingly complied. But he did not turn over his favorite son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth. You see how needed Mephibosheth's son. But do you see how David's relationship with Jonathan continued to save, in this case, Mephibosheth? And David handed over to the Gibeonites 2 of Saul's sons and 5 of his grandsons. And the 7 men were executed at the beginning of barley harvest in the spring. And the Gibeonites left the bodies in the open where birds and wild animals could eat the flesh. And Rizpah, the grieving mother, the grieving step-grandmother, kept watch over the bodies until the rains came, which signaled the end of the famine. Rizpah, she watched and protected those bodies for 6 months. What a woman. As I said, old wounds don't die easily. Saul's tragic mistake of trying to exterminate the Gibeonites from the land of Israel, after God and Joshua had promised them that they would live among the Israelites. That mistake now comes back to haunt Rizpah and Saul's very own descendants. And when David heard about the what you call it, the vigil that Rizpah was conducting out in the field, he had Saul and Jonathan's bones exhumed from Jabesh Gilead, and he held a mass burial for them all in Benjamin, where Saul's father Kish had a family tomb. David was now doing honor. The rains came, the famine was over, and the Gibeonites were satisfied. Revenge. For some of us, revenge running in our bones. On the surface, it looked like David had acted in good faith. All was well in the land again. There was, however, some troubling stuff to come. And we will look at this. We'll start from this again when we come back to this, in our next broadcast. You don't have to wait to enjoy life. I want you to know many Christians, many people who are not Christians struggle. They struggle too long with mental illness, with behavior problems, relationship problems. And these things tend to create significant problems in our daily lives. And every day you live with significant emotional, mental health, relationship problems. That's a day that affects how you live. I want you to know you can change. You can change this. And it's never too late, never too early to seek support from licensed professionals who have the knowledge and the skills to empower you to enjoy life again. Whether you have shut yourself up in your house because you have some sort of phobia, whether you experience anxiety or panic attacks, you may be experiencing problems with depression. You may have been a victim of sexual abuse. You may be a victim of domestic violence today or in the past. You're having marriage problems, relationship problems, some type of trauma, PTSD. You may have been in the military, and you have seen some things that a military individual would see. And those things are continuing to impact you. You may experience in suicidal thoughts. You may have had a suicidal attempt. You may feel hopeless, have a sense of low self-esteem. You may be caught up in a world of violence created by you or inflicted upon you. Some of us struggle with the issue of unforgiveness. We have been hurt of a separation or a divorce. We are dealing with significant resentments. We are dealing with loneliness. You may be experiencing problems raising your children properly. You may be what we call a poly substance abuser. You're abusing drugs, legal and illegal. Today in the United States, we have a opioid epidemic. Young people are killing themselves. Young people, middle-class people, white people, black people, drugs killing us. And opioids are an epidemic today because it's taking its toll, significant toll upon the Caucasian race. Some of us from the black race, we are caught up in a world of violence in our homes being perpetrated upon us, or we are perpetrating it upon others. because of our history, because of our past. These are symptoms which may seem insignificant to some, but over longer period of time, they have major problems upon your life. Some of us are driven to act negatively because of the things that we have done. Why don't you reach out for help? If you're local, you can call us at 770-679-0586. If you're overseas listening to this broadcast or anywhere else in the United States, Google for a family therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. Go to your pastor. If your pastor is properly trained, he or she may be able to help you, to refer you, to hook you up, to provide you with some resources. But you're not in this by yourself. You're not alone. Reach out to somebody. Reach out for help. And by doing so, I pray that God will help you. And I'll be praying for you. If these programs are being a blessing to you, call me, email me, let me know. Again, my name is Dr. Desmond, DESMOND MAUL. You can write me at Desmond. No, that's my personal email. You can write me at dmaul at family360center.com. That's DMAUL at family, the number 360center.com. So until the next time, God bless you real good. Bye-bye.